we wanted to make commentary on that people just basically misunderstand technology. And there's this myth out there that, forums don't matter and they don't affect the press or whatever, and clearly they do affect the press. And what I wanted to do is just point out that we need to understand that it does make a difference and we need to put it in its place.
In 1993, a team led by Denis Dyack, Silicon Knights, teamed up with Crystal Dynamics to deliver Blood Omen: Legacy of Kain, a brutal Zelda-like vampire action RPG that Dyack proudly called a game which adults would want to play. And he wasn't wrong. By 1996, it had what most games didn't: professional voice acting, cinematic cutscenes, a dark, mature atmosphere.
The future says you die. But I am dead. As are you.
Blood Omen exploded into a cult classic, spawning one of gaming's most beloved gothic franchises, Legacy of Kain. But not for Dyack. A bitter legal battle saw him accuse Crystal Dynamics of plagiarizing his premise for a sequel. The fight ended in an undisclosed settlement, but Legacy of Kain went on to make history with Crystal Dynamics. The irony, the sequel, Soul Reaver, was proven completely unrelated to Dyack's work, and went on to eclipse Blood Omen in both critical and commercial success. From there, Dyack and Silicon Knights began a journey that would spiral into absolute madness. Among his earliest concepts, like Kain, was another passion project Crystal Dynamics had passed on, a futuristic sci-fi epic called Too Human. A game that would spend more than a decade in development hell, sets the bizarre record of being an exclusive across 3 console generations and 3 platforms, ignites a courtroom war with Epic Games, all the while burning through tens of millions of Microsoft's dollars. The aftermath: disastrous launches, bankrupt studios, failed Kickstarters, and a one-man crusade against anyone who dared to disagree with him. This is a story of hubris, mismanagement, and one of the biggest failures in Xbox history, led by a man at war with a very community that made him famous.
Saying anything negative that might not be true is a preview. All you can say is the concept's cool, maybe it's a little disappointing, but when you go out and you label something terrible, that makes a difference. That's an impact. I will go so far as to say this particular thing probably is going to change the industry.
Here we are. The excitement is everywhere. We're on the floor of the Electronic Entertainment Expo in Los Angeles, California, with a special edition of GameSpot TV.
May 15, 1999, E3. On the PlayStation floor, Too Human made its debut, a cyberpunk, Blade Runner-style epic from Silicon Knights and EA. The surviving footage, a grainy, soundless clip of the PlayStation booth. But the early previews told the real story. This wasn't just another game, it was a massive undertaking. You would take on the role of police officer John Franks in the year 2450, get exposed to a high-tech corporate world, dealing with issues such as technology changing our lives. There would be hours of cinematics, a sprawling world without loading screens, and so much content it would require 4 full CD-ROMs. In Denis's words, Too Human is a futuristic, psychological thriller. It's a real-time adventure game that mixes elements of role-playing, like Kain, cinematography like Final Fantasy, and a solid storyline. Too Human is also very much like Metal Gear Solid, where we give the player the option to explore things the way he wants to, and be stealth if he wants to, or be action-packed if he wants to. In the late 90s, this would have put Too Human right in the middle of the action-adventure boom, only with a far bigger scope, one that almost felt too far ahead of its time. The release date? Q1 2000. But Q1 came and went, met with only silence. Then, May 8th, 2000, the headline: Too Human cancelled for the PlayStation. For fans, it was a gut punch. This was supposed to be Silicon Knights' next epic, a concept Denis claimed had been in the works since 1993. But shelving Too Human was nothing compared to what Dyack was about to do next. Nintendo, who had been quietly eyeing Silicon Knights since Legacy of Kain, swooped in with an offer: develop an exclusive, cinematic, story-driven psychological horror game for their own console. Denis was quick to set the record straight to IGN. Too Human will not come out for PlayStation or any future Sony consoles. We are a dedicated Nintendo developer now. When we are ready to announce new information on the game, we will. And so, what began as a Nintendo 64 concept soon evolved into a GameCube exclusive. The 2002 Lovecraftian horror, Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem, and soon after, a full remake of one of gaming's most prestigious franchises, Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes in 2004, co-developed with Kojima's team. To give you an idea of how close Silicon Knights had become with Nintendo, both projects received direct oversight and visits from Nintendo's Miyamoto and Satoru Iwata. In fact, it was Miyamoto himself who personally recommended Denis Dyack's studio to Hideo Kojima. That's how massive Silicon Knights' reputation had grown, even standing side by side at the 2003 E3.
But more importantly than that in itself, I think, is the relationship that's being bonded. And I really think it sends a strong message to the future of the future collaborations to come for Nintendo and Konami and the future of video games.
It's no surprise then that both games earned critical praise. Eternal Darkness became another cult classic, especially for its fourth wall-breaking effects, gripping story, and a haunting atmosphere. Yet, disappointingly, it sold fewer than 500,000 copies. And Too Human, not entirely dead. At Nintendo's 2000 Space World, it resurfaced as a GameCube prototype. The visuals were sharper and the cybernetic vibe intact.
And in some sense, we're doing some early prototype stuff with Too Human, and I talked about that before, openly, that we took, basically a lot of the stuff we had developed for Too Human and basically moved it over to Eternal Darkness and adopted from there.
Dennis, the ever-so-forum and message board regular, was seen replying on Nintendo Insider forums regarding the future of Too Human. We never know when we will be done. It keeps getting bigger and bigger for us. At the end of the day, you will not be disappointed. But tragically, that's not how the story went. You see, there was a problem: the GameCube. It was Nintendo's least successful home console at the time, vastly outsold by the PlayStation 2 and even edged out by the original Xbox. And while Nintendo had tried to market to older audiences, it was still seen as the family-friendly brand. That reputation likely hurt Eternal Darkness, a mature psychological horror on a console best known for Mario and Zelda. And with the Wii coming their way, a console that, according to Dennis, wasn't very powerful, the ambitions simply didn't align. Had they stayed with PlayStation, things might have turned out very differently, but it was too late for regrets.
That Silicon Knights is not meant for smaller, simpler games. Both sides really wanted to continue to work. We just couldn't figure out a way to combine our philosophy with a smaller, simpler approach, because it clearly isn't.
By 2004, Silicon Knights ended their exclusive deal with Nintendo. A decision that baffled fans, considering there were rumors of a potential realistic Zelda game for the GameCube. But they were free agents again, and publishers lined up. March 2005. Sega signed a next-gen pact for high-budget Silicon Knights titles. May 2005, Silicon Knights partnered with Epic Games to use Unreal Engine 3 exclusively for all future projects. That same month, Too Human was back from the dead. Not as a one-off, but as a planned Xbox 360 exclusive trilogy, with Microsoft's full weight behind it. But eagle-eyed fans noticed something was off. Dennis, however, was confident. I think gamers can expect what they normally expect from us, even a bit more. The relationship with Microsoft is going to create something very unique. People will notice that we are consistent with our games, but will also be very excited with where we are taking it. Dyack had worked with the industry's best, from Kojima to Nintendo's Miyamoto. Now, with Microsoft's backing, Too Human was being positioned as Xbox royalty, alongside Halo and Gears of War. But instead of cementing Dyack's legacy, this would be the game that broke it. A release that dragged his name, his studio, and his legacy into a spiral he would never escape.
For all the fans following Too Human, we have put every single effort and all of our willpower into making this absolutely the best thing that we have ever created. And we're working really, really hard to try to make sure no one is disappointed and it goes beyond everyone's expectations. And, you know, I look forward to interacting with people on the boards, which I'll start doing much more very soon. And be prepared for some heavy-hitting Too Human stuff in the near future, because it's coming.
Silicon Knights is a guild of talented individuals dedicated to creating groundbreaking video games. Like a true guild, we are completely self-sustaining, creating 100% of the content of our games. Our aim is to completely engage and immerse gamers by combining the very best elements of technology, art, audio, gameplay, and story. For each game, we blend these elements until the result becomes greater than the sum of its parts. Too Human didn't just get revived, it got reborn. The gritty cyberpunk game shown in 1999 had morphed into something completely different, a sci-fi fantasy mashup of Norse mythology, casting players as a cybernetic god, Baldur. Still original, still ambitious, and at its core, a theme that was as relevant then as it is now: the dangers and consequences of unchecked technology. On paper, it still sounded like the holy grail of gaming.
The RPG elements in Too Human are very similar to hunting and gathering games like Diablo or World of Warcraft, where you can customize your character's armor, cybernetics, and weapons. We also have skill trees where you can sort of pick what type of character you want to play.
One of the really unique and important things about Too Human is that it's a combination of action and role-playing. And in order to do that properly, we really had to make sure that the action complemented the role-playing and the role-playing complemented the action.
One of the ideas with the camera system is we want to speak the language of film through games, and if you're going to speak the language of film, you need to be able to cut seamlessly between different environments. And here you're going to see a fully realized outdoor environment that's actually quite huge. You notice that we're switching between multiple environments without any kind of load times, and we believe that any kind of load time really breaks the experience for the gamer.
The story's been like, we know exactly what's going to happen. In a sense, almost like I would describe it, I don't want to talk too much about that yet, but almost like DVD material.
I think when we started partnering with Microsoft and we started moving towards the 360, we look at, live as a pillar for the game. It really changed a lot of the way we were thinking about it, and we really wanted to make cooperative play completely seamless from single player. It really plays the same from a standpoint of it's a very Twitch action game combined with deep role-playing elements, but when you play cooperatively, it just opens up this whole new realm.
The first chapter was locked for holiday 2006. Online, nostalgia was fueling the hype. Players who had been waiting since the PlayStation days were convinced this would be Silicon Knights' masterpiece. I've been stoked for this game, and the closer we get to it, the more promising it looks. Eternal Darkness was so underrated, so hopefully Silicon Knights pulls this one out and gets the credit they deserve. May 2006, E3. The world's first real look at Too Human.
With the Xbox 360, we've always wanted to make entertainment the dominant form of entertainment for this century, and with the 360 we can actually now create production value that is competitive with the movie theaters.
The premise was still intriguing, the promises still massive, but cracks were starting to show. Odd design choices had players scratching their heads.
So when we went from 2D to 3D, when people were playing Pac-Man, they never worried about the camera. We made this jump to 3D, this added layer of complexity got added, and people are worrying about the camera at the same time as playing. So we created this camera system. We think other people are going to do this afterwards, is why worry about the camera when we can just concentrate on the gameplay, and if the camera's focusing in and changing things. So we're not really trying to say that Too Human may change the world, but we're thinking that this methodology is really what's going to change the industry and really bring it to the next level of entertainment.
And Dennis, he wasn't just selling a game, he was making some very bold claims.
And the idea is to create an experience where people can have it nowhere else. And if you're going to be, really have the choice of watching Lord of the Rings or playing Too Human, you'd rather play Too Human.
Oh. But no flashy comparison could hide what was on screen. The performance struggled to hit 30 FPS. The camera was clunky, the combat even clunkier. Gamers and the press weren't holding back. Over on NeoGAF, a forum at the time infamous for its savage, often trolling and dogpiling tone, the knives were out. Threads tore into Two Humans' E3 showing, and soon Denis Dyack himself became a target. Holiday 2006 came, and instead of a release, Two Human vanished from the spotlight. January 2007, Denis breaks the silence with an epic Ice Bucket blog post. Last year's E3 was very painful. I'm glad it is dead. He went at length about his love for video games, the history of Silicon Knights, and yes, the hundreds of comments ripping apart the game's frame rates and camera, admitting they had gone dark intentionally. We felt the pain would be worth the gain, and do whatever it takes to make Two Human great. It looked like they were taking the time to polish. Denis even shared a single screenshot showing off improved graphics. But in reality, this was the moment things started to get really bizarre. On March 11, 2007, a NeoGAF thread sparked fresh rumors of a delay. With its endless dev cycle and E3 baggage, Two Human had become a running joke. Denis jumps in. In time, these comments will be bearers of fruit. Unfortunately, for many here, they are going to be very bitter. Instead of ignoring the trolls, he fed them, replying to meme replies and jokes. The very next day, he appears on a 1UP podcast, a video game outlet, railing against previews and going so far as to call for the abolishment of game previews altogether.
And I mean it in a very positive way, as I think we need to stop previewing games 100%. You're saying Two Humans terrible.
Well, I'm saying Two Humans showing at E3, like last E3 was, right?
Sure, and I think, and so Mark, you're saying Two Humans terrible. I think it's clear from this, actually, and I would actually have to say that the forums influenced your opinion. If you take the average consumer or the average reader, you're saying it's terrible. And
I'm saying the build that was at E3 was terrible.
I agreed
right?
very specifically.
Yeah.
I agree that that's true.
Okay.
But by and large, the message is going to be Two Humans terrible.
While Dyack's points had some validity, trade show demos are often vertical slices that don't represent the final product, for better or worse. However, framing internet forums as some all-powerful cabal influencing the press, that was a stretch, and made him look like someone who was terminally online. The truth was, Two Human wasn't anywhere near ready, and it probably never should have been shown at E3 in the first place. But Denis wasn't done fighting. The same day as the podcast, he jumped back on NeoGAF, arguing with users, again and again and again. Eventually, the noise died down, but what happened next was even crazier. July 2007. Silicon Knights drops a bombshell, a lawsuit against Epic Games. Their claim: Epic sabotaged Unreal Engine 3 for competitors, prioritizing Gears of War and failing to deliver promised support and features. Dyack blamed the disastrous E3 demo directly on Epic's broken engine, while Gears, supposedly running on a far more advanced build, walked away with best game of the show. According to Silicon Knights, they were left with no choice but to build their own tech, by modifying Unreal Engine itself, becoming what Denis called Silicon Knights Engine. Problem is, the license they signed explicitly forbade that. And let's not forget, Epic and Silicon Knights were both tied to Microsoft, making this ugly fight under the same corporate roof. Ironically, by suing, Silicon Knights admitted they altered Epic's code. Epic hit back hard with a countersuit, accusing Silicon Knights of breach of contract and stealing trade secrets. Their statement pulled no punches. The plain language of Silicon Knights' complaint makes clear that Silicon Knights wants to take Epic's licensed technology, pay nothing for it, and use it in any way it pleases. Still, Two Human moved forward, not knowing this lawsuit was a ticking time bomb, one that would go on to cause more destruction than any bad demo or poor preview ever could. August 2007. Two Human finally had a date. It is always darkest before dawn, said Denis. The dawn, in this case, was August 2008, and a playable demo that, in his words, would speak for itself. The marketing machine went into overdrive. Beyond the usual trailers, Silicon Knights produced an entire fictional documentary, a mock investigation expanding the game's lore. It was a bold campaign, and a clear sign this wasn't just a passion project for Silicon Knights, it was a massive bet for Microsoft too. So marketing was, well, less conventional. At one point, Dyack explained to Human to Penthouse Pets models. Sadly, the video has been lost to time, with only memes and screen grabs remaining of the legendary moment. June 2008. Just 2 months before release, Dyack created a NeoGAF thread titled "To Human, Stand and Be Counted." It was an ultimatum. Denis claimed To Human was not just good, it was the best game of the year. And if he was wrong, he would accept a custom tag reading "Owned by GAF." But if he was right, every critic and troll would be branded "Owned by To Human." Replies ranged from "Dude, what are you doing?" And honestly, I couldn't have said better myself. To his credit, it did show confidence in his product. But Denis wasn't just standing on this hill, he was ready to die on it. In interviews, he doubled down, proudly defending the stunt.
These new forms of communication lose all that reciprocity, and generally people become aggravated. They say things that they would never say in person, things that are accurate, misleading. They hide behind this anonymity, and people need to understand that that is not true communication. We need to understand that it does make a difference, and we need to put it in its place.
Then he went back on the One Up podcast, expanding his crusade, claiming forums needed reform, as if taking down internet trolls was the moral crusade of our time.
And if you're going to look at the NeoGAF forum as a non-profit organization, if it does not reform itself, it's eventually going to start to crumble. And there's going to be a point where they step over the line where someone's going to shut them down. And the question is, okay, if I wanted to move in and shut that place down, do I have a grounds? It would be under their own forum policy.
While NeoGAF didn't exactly have the best reputation at the time, the reality was simple. If you are in the free market of ideas, a public figure, and constantly in the spotlight, you are going to face a wide range of comments and opinions, good, bad, and ugly. Most gamers, most consumers, weren't deciding their purchases based on the posts of a fringe internet forum. And if you didn't like the environment like most developers at the time, you would simply avoid the lion's den. But to Denis, NeoGAF wasn't just a forum, it was enemy number one. August 19, 2008. After more than a decade in the making, To Human release day finally arrived. And Dyack, he wasn't worried in the slightest.
Not concerned about the critical reception at all. Do I think people are going to be critical? Well, people already have. People were critical about the game before they even played it, so I don't think that's necessarily going to change. I think if people see the game for what it is, and review the game for what it is, and it'll get a good reception. It's a solid game. In the end, if we're going to worry about critical reviews, then we're in the wrong industry.
But the verdict? Not horrible, but nowhere near the blockbuster it was sold as. Some players praised the customization and progression systems, bringing loot-driven, grindy dungeon-crawling gameplay to consoles, a genre still mostly rooted on PC. This was before Diablo 3, before Borderlands, Destiny. From that perspective, it's easy to see why Microsoft bet so big. But the innovation Denis Dyack proclaimed would change the industry, like mapping attacks to the right stick paired with an automatic camera meant to simplify combat, simply didn't work in practice. The result was clunky, unintuitive, and for many players, borderline unplayable. Yet, Dyack was so convinced, he even patented the control scheme, as if it was gaming's next revolution. Layer onto that unskippable 30-second death animations, dated visuals, and a convoluted story left tragically incomplete, banking entirely on the promise of sequels that would never come. And none of it should have been a surprise. This was a game restarted, reimagined, and rebuilt so many times across so many engines and directions. Worse still, it was all guided by the vision of a single man, deaf to criticism and blind to concern. Ultimately, it fell victim to the politician syndrome, a mountain of bold claims and nothing to back them up. In the end, To Human landed as a mediocre action-looter RPG, loved by a few, ignored by most, and destined to fade into obscurity. NeoGAF, the sworn enemy, had effectively won. Dyack was permanently banned from the site, and that years-long feud fizzled out with barely any discussion left about the game itself. By 2011, Too Human had sold roughly 700,000 copies. Denis would later call it one of the best-performing Xbox titles of 2008. A bold claim, considering it released the same year as Gears of War 2, Fallout 3, Fable 2, and not to mention GTA 4. The game's budget, however, has always been murky. Rumors placed it anywhere between $60 to $100 million, with some reports claiming Microsoft alone invested $80 million. Dyack disputed those numbers, insisting only a fraction was spent on the first game. If his version is true, the sales weren't a complete disaster, but if the higher estimates were accurate, the losses for Microsoft were staggering. That same year, Dyack faced the question: was Too Human dead? No, not at all. It is still on the table, and we plan on finishing the trilogy. But the real killer wasn't reviews, or sales, or even NeoGAF, but one of the most brutal legal defeats the gaming industry has ever seen. Before we can continue the rest of the story, we have to turn our attention to a critical moment: Silicon Knights' next video game, a high-profile deal with Activision and Marvel, X-Men Destiny. Announced in October 2010, it was an action RPG promising branching storylines, player choice, and superhero spectacle. On paper, it looked like redemption. In reality, a disaster. Reviewers didn't just dislike it, they destroyed it. A careless, cynical, opportunistic mess that Silicon Knights and Activision should be ashamed to release. If Too Human had been disappointing, X-Men Destiny was nothing short of public embarrassment. So, what the hell happened? October 2012. Kotaku drops a now infamous exposé, pulling back the curtain. 8 former employees, all telling the same story. A studio built entirely around one man's ego. A man that proudly smiles in staff meetings and describes his role as a benevolent dictatorship. You are either for him or against him. He runs his company like a high school gym class or football team. He sets examples of those who offend him. He is incapable of celebrating others. He would abandon the project for 3 months at a time, say everything is good when it's obviously completely broken, then come back again in a month and yell at everybody. While Denis Dyack loved to publicly describe Silicon Knights as a guild, a team united towards a common goal, in reality, it was a one-man show. It's often argued that Nintendo's oversight had once reined them in on Eternal Darkness and the Twin Snakes, ensuring that trademark Nintendo quality. But with Too Human and later games, Dyack was in complete control. Nobody to push back, nobody to say no. And that's how you wanted it to be, and that's when things started to get even uglier. Sources alleged that Dyack treated X-Men Destiny and Activision itself like a personal piggy bank. The deal was secured of past glories, but once the ink was dry, resources were quietly siphoned into its true obsession, an Eternal Darkness sequel. When Activision caught wind, they slammed the brakes. Funding cut, a hard release date set, a tax write-off, and Silicon Knights were forced to scramble with high turnover and dwindling staff. The result? 2 critical and commercial failures back to back. Dyack would later state funding was cut due to Marvel's transition to Disney, and admitting he was barely involved in X-Men Destiny, blaming the Epic Games lawsuit for pulling his attention away. A lawsuit tied to a Frankenstein engine still causing chaos years later. A problem entirely of his own making, but one he would never admit.
The other thing that I underestimated was the amount of time that a lawsuit will take in your mind share is devastating. And then when you even when you look at X-Men Destiny, I was not working on that project a lot near the end, almost at all.
The critical flaw wasn't that Dyack sued Epic. He might have had a case that Unreal support was lacking. The fatal mistake was rewriting and modifying the engine's code. in direct violation of an exclusive license agreement. That, combined with the Activision fiasco, left Silicon Knights completely exposed, and everything was about to come crashing down. November 2012. Epic Games didn't just win, they obliterated Silicon Knights. The judge ruled Silicon Knights deliberately and repeatedly copied thousands of lines of Epic Games' copyrighted code and then attempted to conceal its wrongdoing by removing Epic Games' copyright notices and by disguising Epic Games' copyrighted code as Silicon Knights' own. Shameless doesn't even begin to cover it. Silicon Knights was ordered to pay Epic over $9 million in damages and a court order to destroy everything built with Unreal. Every physical copy, every line of code tied to Unreal Engine, to Human, X-Men Destiny, even unreleased projects like the Eternal Darkness sequel and many more wiped from existence. The crash was instant. The once 100-person studio was reduced to just 5 employees. A ghost ship captained by a man who had steered it full speed into the rocks. But somehow, this train wreck still wasn't done crashing. A year later, Silicon Knights' journey was over. It was shut down for good, but not for Denis.
Being in the industry for a very, very long time, one of the biggest problems that we always had as game designers is we never had that direct contact with the consumer. So with digital distribution, we can look to ways to raise our own money and interact directly with the consumers and have that direct feedback that allows us to do things in many, many different ways and ways that haven't been done before.
The age of Kickstarter had arrived, and Denis saw his opening. Even before Silicon Knights officially closed its doors, he had already made his next move, founding Precursor Games with a handful of employees still loyal to him, and allegedly with old Silicon Knights assets, equipment, and ideas. It was Silicon Knights in disguise. Same DNA, just under a new name. Like a cockroach, it refused to die. And just when you thought the story couldn't get any stranger, it did. May 2013. Precursor Games and Denis Dyack unveiled a Kickstarter for Shadow of the Eternals, a spiritual successor to Eternal Darkness. One last desperate swing at recapturing the glory days. And with it came a trailer. There was gameplay, there were assets, and honestly, for a studio with fewer than 10 people, Shadow of the Eternals looked fine. The goal, $1,350,000. The result, not so fine. After more than a month, they scraped together just over $100,000. To most observers, the problem was obvious. Years of bad press, broken promises, and a total loss of trust in Denis Dyack. But in Denis's mind, the real culprit was Kotaku. The year-old expose, he claimed, had defamed his reputation and poisoned the campaign. So he went on the offensive.
So the problem that we're facing is not only that some of the allegations made against me are affecting me, but they're affecting everyone here at Precursor Games and others who want to get this project funded.
What followed was a long, meandering attempt to set the record straight, basically arguing that Kotaku's anonymous sources were unreliable by citing his own anonymous sources. If Dyack truly believed that these accusations were false and personally injurious, he would be suing Kotaku for libel. The fact that he is not doing so tells you all you need to know. This guy is a joke. This whole thing is a joke. None of it worked. The Kickstarter collapsed, officially cancelled. For now, because just 1 month later, in July, Denis Dyack was back, relaunching the exact same campaign. This time, the ask was smaller, $750,000. And for a moment, it actually looked possible. Over $300,000 poured in. Then came the wildest controversy yet. Precursor Games co-founder Ken McCulloch, a man who had been with Denis since the Legacy of Kain days, was arrested on child pornography charges. The studio quickly cut ties, but the damage was irreversible. Bad PR piled onto bad momentum, interest cratered, and for a second time in just a few months, the second Kickstarter was dead. Most people would have stopped. Denis doubled down, founding yet another studio.
Well, we're excited to announce Quantum Entanglement Entertainment, and what's happened is I partnered with people from the film and television industry, and we're creating a company that's going to work on film, television, video games all at the same time.
The reality, by 2018, that studio was quietly shut down. But did he give up? Oh, no, of course not. That brings us to the present. Enter Apocalypse Studios. Apocalypse is a video game developer led by experienced veterans creating innovative concepts that aim to revolutionize the gaming sector, integrate AI, cloud technology, user-generated content, and custom-made content to elevate the narrative to greater heights than the sum of its parts. The first project, a spiritual successor to Legacy of Kain, that housed Sonata, a free-to-play co-op action RPG that feels like a mashup of every Denis Dyack project ever made. Funnily, on the About page, Dyack proudly showcases the games he had worked on, but curiously, 2 were missing. This time, no Kickstarter, but still crowdfunded, with backing tiers from $30 to $125. Denis had this to say about his ambitions for the future. There's been a recent shift from the traditional one-time purchase to games as a service model. Free-to-play games have been at the forefront of this shift, offering gamers a constant stream of new content, with microtransactions that allow gamers to support the game monetarily. Apocalypse and That House Sonata are built around this new gaming market.
You serious?
As for Shadow of the Eternals, it's not cancelled, but is also not going to be in active development for a while. The response from gamers? Brutal. Well, this looks like something that should have been made in 2004. Been there, done that. When I saw the "From the creator of Legacy of Kain" text, I got really excited, but that excitement came and went, literally in the blink of an eye. And here we are, nearly 7 years later. The game is still in development. Another epic cycle of hype, promises, and endless waiting. On the bright side, Denis seems to be away from the spotlight, avoiding forums and other social media. But as for That House Sonata, that is a story that will almost certainly repeat itself. But that is a story for another time. Too Human and the Saga of Denis Dyack is one of the wildest gaming stories ever told. The terminally online descent of a man willing to die on a hill called NeoGAF, a studio that worked with PlayStation, Nintendo's Miyamoto, Kojima, Microsoft, Epic Games. He worked with some of the most brilliant minds in gaming, created opportunities most studios can only dream about. And then he and his studio shot itself in the foot again and again and again, always finding someone else to blame. His passion for video games is undeniable. In another timeline, maybe Too Human would have been the trilogy Denis dreamed of. But in this one, a decade after release, it quietly resurfaced on Xbox, completely free. Not as a triumphant return, but as a relic from a forgotten era. The tragic story of a developer who flew too close to the sun without ever looking down, fighting everyone along the way until there was nothing left to fight for.